"Do it," Linda said, and the man by the rail gave a short nod before stepping onto the first plank like he was testing ice. I stayed where I was, halfway between the porch and the creek, the wet grass cold around my boots, my hands empty, my face probably calmer than anybody there expected. Most people think anger looks loud. Real anger, the kind that settles behind your ribs and sharpens your hearing, gets quiet. I could hear every little thing that morning. The scrape of metal against gravel, the hollow knock of a boot heel on old timber, the slow drip of creek water from the underside of the span, even the faint click of Linda shifting her pen against that clipboard, already preparing whatever neat little sentence she planned to write down about compliance and community standards. One of the contractors glanced back at me, maybe waiting for an argument, maybe hoping I would give him one. Instead, I asked, "You all got this in writing from the board?" Linda answered before he could. "You are not in a position to question procedure." Her tone had that polished edge I had heard in every monthly HOA meeting, the same voice she used when she wanted disagreement to sound embarrassing. I almost smiled, because I had learned something about people like Linda Mercer over the past 2 years. They could not stand silence from the person they were trying to corner. Silence made them fill the space, and when they filled the space, they usually said too much. She took 3 careful steps closer, stopping just short of a muddy patch that would have ruined those expensive boots, and lowered her voice like she was giving me one last chance to save face. "You were notified. The structure is unsafe, unapproved, and located within an area governed by neighborhood restrictions. This is being handled." I looked past her, down the line of the bridge toward the far post where the plate was half hidden under creek stain and years of runoff. A few numbers were visible now that the morning light had shifted. Enough for me. Enough to bring back an image I had not thought about in years, standing beside a county survey crew while they marked drainage access points after a heavy spring washout. At the time, I had only cared that they were not going to close the crossing. I did not realize that memory would be waiting for me on a foggy Tuesday with Linda Mercer standing 10 feet away, handing me the cleanest proof of arrogance I had ever seen. The first rail came loose with a tired crack, more sad than dramatic, and dropped into the shallow water below with a splash that sent 2 birds lifting out of the cattails. Linda did not flinch. She watched it fall with satisfaction, like each board disappearing meant she had restored order to the universe. I let my eyes go to the loader, then to the workers, then to Linda again, taking in every detail I would need later. Company logo on the truck door. Timestamp glowing on my security camera mounted under the eave. The envelope of violation notices still tucked under my arm from the day before. And Linda, standing in plain view of everything, directing a job she did not understand on land she had never bothered to verify. "You are making a mistake," I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not dress it up. I just gave her the truth as plainly as I could. She gave me that smile again, tighter this time, and tapped the edge of her clipboard with one manicured fingernail. "No, Mr. Calloway," she said. "I am correcting one." Then she turned back to the crew and lifted her hand like a conductor starting the next measure. And I knew right then I was not going to stop a single thing. I was going to let the entire mistake finish itself. The sound changed first. Once the outer rail was gone, the bridge stopped looking like part of the creek and started looking like evidence. Every plank they lifted exposed something older beneath it, hardware darkened by years of weather, bolts set deeper than a homeowner would have bothered with, bracing cut to a standard I recognized because I had spent too many years around county jobs not to. Linda did not see any of that. She saw an audience. By then a few neighbors had wandered out onto their back patios with mugs in hand, robes pulled tight against the morning chill, drawn by the machine noise and the kind of trouble people prefer when it belongs to somebody else. From where they stood, it probably looked simple. Ethan Calloway had finally lost a fight with the HOA. Linda Mercer had won another one. I could almost hear the story forming in their heads. The difficult man at the edge of the subdivision had been put in his place. What they could not hear was the small, precise catalog I was making in mine. Loader company name in blue letters on the truck door. Out-of-county plates on the equipment trailer. One worker wearing a neon jacket with a stitched badge from a paving and grading contractor I knew by reputation. Time on the camera feed. Angle of the bucket. Position of the tracks against the bank. I had worked enough job sites in my life to know that details matter more than outrage ever will. Linda turned again when she realized I had not moved any closer. I think my stillness bothered her more than if I had shouted. She wanted resistance. She wanted me red-faced and reckless so she could label me unstable in some future meeting minutes. Instead, she got me standing in wet grass with creek fog moving around my ankles, watching her like a man measuring lumber before a cut. "You might want to remove any personal items from the area," she said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Personal items. As if there were patio furniture out there. As if this was a backyard cleanup instead of an unauthorized demolition on a creek crossing older than half the houses in the development. I said nothing. One of the contractors crouched at the base of the far side and brushed mud off a steel bracket with his glove. For half a second, the plate showed clean in the morning light. Stamped numerals. Inventory code. A county mark, small and plain and fatal. My pulse did not jump. That was the strange part. It settled. There is a calm that comes over you when confusion finally burns off and leaves only structure behind. I knew then exactly what I was looking at. Years earlier, after a bad storm pushed debris into the drainage channel, a county engineer had walked this same bank with a measuring rod and orange paint. He had talked about access corridors, maintenance rights, flood maps, and responsibility lines. Most people hear words like that and tune out. I never did. That morning, those old fragments came back sharp as broken glass. This was never about a private footbridge. It had only worn that disguise because I was the one who kept it usable. Linda had mistaken maintenance for ownership, visibility for authority, and silence for surrender. The center planks came up next, stacked off to one side in a rough pile that smelled like wet pine and old creek water. The loader backed up, then rolled forward again, its tracks pressing deeper into the bank. I looked at those tracks and thought about drainage easements, site disturbance, access interference, and how expensive ignorance can become once it is written down by the right office. Linda was talking now, saying something to the neighbors about safety and unauthorized improvements and fiduciary duty, words she wore like costume jewelry, bright and cheap and meant to impress from a distance. I let her talk. I let the workers keep going. I let the cameras record everything from under my eave while the fog thinned and the sun started burning a pale strip through the trees. By 7 o'clock, half the bridge was gone, and Linda Mercer was standing on the bank smiling like she had solved a problem. I remember thinking she had not solved anything. She had just given it a file number. By 7:30, the creek looked wrong without the span across it. The space where the bridge had always sat felt too open, too clean in the worst possible way, like a front tooth missing from a familiar face. The workers had stacked the salvaged planks in uneven piles near the bank, and the fresh marks from the loader cut through the damp ground in heavy parallel lines that would stay visible for days if rain did not come. Linda lingered long after the hardest part was over, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to be seen at the scene of her own victory. She spoke to 2 board members who had arrived late, gesturing with her clipboard toward the creek as if she were giving a property tour. I could not hear every word from where I stood, but I heard enough. Liability. Standards. Unauthorized use. Community oversight. She kept choosing phrases that sounded official from a distance and empty up close. One of the men from the grading company walked over to me while the others secured chains in the back of the truck. He was older than the rest, maybe late 50s, sun-lined face, Carolina accent smoothed by years on job sites. He kept his voice low. "You the owner here?" he asked. I looked past him at the broken crossing, then back at the county tag, still half visible under the far footing. "Depends what map you are using," I said. He squinted a little, like that answer landed somewhere he did not like. Then he glanced over his shoulder at Linda and lowered his voice even more. "She told us this was private association property. Clean authorization. Board approved." I nodded once. "I am sure that is what she told you." He did not smile. Men who work around permits and equipment for a living know when something feels off, even if they cannot name it yet. He rubbed the back of his neck, looked toward the creek channel, and then returned to the truck without another word. That was fine with me. I did not need him convinced. I just needed him uneasy enough to remember details later. Linda finally crossed the yard toward me after the equipment was loaded. The fog had lifted by then, and sunlight was coming through the sycamores in pale bands, catching the damp rail posts that had been left cut short on either side of the water. She stopped a few feet away, careful as ever not to put her shoes in mud, and handed me a white envelope with my name written in neat black print. "This is the formal assessment notice," she said. "The association will be seeking reimbursement for removal costs. You may also be subject to additional compliance review if any further unapproved structures are discovered near the creek." I took the envelope but did not open it. The paper felt crisp and dry in my hand. Office paper. Expensive paper, the kind used by people who think a clean font can do the work of truth. "You are billing me," I said, "for tearing out something you never verified." Her expression tightened for half a second, just enough to show the steel underneath the smile. "Mr. Calloway, your habit of acting as though rules do not apply to you is exactly why this action became necessary." That was Linda in her purest form. Not angry, not emotional, just certain. Certain that proximity meant ownership, that authority could be declared into existence. That a man living at the edge of the neighborhood with work boots on his porch and tools in his shed must naturally be the weaker party in any dispute involving paper. I turned the envelope over in my hand and listened to the creek moving through the opening where the bridge had been. Water does not care who chairs a homeowners association. It follows grade, channel, and gravity. Records are the same way. "All right," I said. "Then I guess we will let the right people sort it out." Linda gave a small, satisfied nod, hearing surrender where there was none, and walked back toward her SUV with the posture of a woman already drafting the email that would make her sound heroic by noon. I waited until her taillights disappeared past the hedges before I went inside, set the envelope on my kitchen table, and pulled up the county property portal on my laptop. Outside, the creek kept moving under open air. Inside, I started looking for the map that would put her name next to a mistake big enough to outlive her smile. The county property portal had not changed much in 10 years, which was probably why I trusted it more than anything with a logo and a mission statement. It still looked like it had been built by somebody who cared more about parcel accuracy than appearance. All pale gray boxes and clumsy search fields, but buried inside that plain layout were the things that actually mattered. Deeds, plat maps, drainage corridors, easements, maintenance access notes. The kind of records that do not get impressed by a woman with a clipboard and a talent for speaking incomplete sentences. I sat at my kitchen table with the envelope from the HOA unopened beside my coffee mug and the morning light moving slowly across the wood grain while I pulled up layer after layer of the land around my property. My house sat exactly where I had always known it sat, on the outside edge of the subdivision where the lots got wider and the board got less comfortable. The creek ran behind my place in a narrow bend lined with sycamore, scrub oak, and a shelf of limestone that showed white after hard rain. The bridge had always looked like an extension of my land because the footpath from my back fence led straight to it, and for years I had let people think what they wanted. I repaired loose boards. I cleared storm branches. I kept the approach walk usable. In a neighborhood built on assumptions, maintenance becomes ownership in other people's minds. But maps do not care who swings the hammer. I zoomed in until the parcel line sharpened. My boundary stopped short of the creek approach by more than I remembered, and then there it was, running across the screen in thin colored hatch marks with a notation box off to the side. Drainage access easement. County maintenance corridor. Width 20 feet from center line. I leaned back in the chair and let that sit for a second. Outside, through the window over the sink, I could see the gap where the bridge used to be, sunlight catching on the water moving through it. Linda had not just ordered the removal of something she assumed was mine. She had stepped into a corridor reserved for county access and directed equipment onto a protected approach tied to drainage infrastructure. That was already bad. Then I found the archived layer. Older map set. Scanned from a survey that predated the subdivision itself. It showed a small crossing at roughly the same point, marked not as a decorative feature or private improvement, but as a maintenance access structure tied to stormwater control on the downstream side. I felt that cold, steady kind of satisfaction you only get when memory and paperwork line up so cleanly, it almost feels scripted. The county engineer from years ago had not been making idle conversation on the bank after that flood. He had been standing in a place his department actually had rights to enter. I opened the HOA envelope then, mostly because I wanted to see how far Linda had committed herself in writing. The letter inside was exactly what I expected. Formal tone. Association seal. 3 paragraphs of inflated certainty. It stated that an unauthorized crossing located within the managed residential boundary had been removed in the interest of community safety, and that I, as the presumed responsible property holder, would be assessed for contractor mobilization, labor, and site correction. Presumed responsible. I read that phrase twice. Not confirmed. Not documented. Presumed. That single word told me everything. Linda had built her whole morning on assumption, and then had the confidence to mail the assumption to my house. I pulled my laptop closer and started saving everything into one folder. Parcel map. Easement overlay. Archived survey image. Tax boundary view. County drainage notation. Then I opened the exterior camera feed and clipped the footage from before sunrise through equipment departure, making sure the timestamp stayed visible in the corner. By the time I was done, the kitchen smelled like reheated coffee and printer paper, and the neat little stack beside my elbow looked less like a homeowner's complaint and more like the beginning of a case file. Around noon my phone buzzed with a neighborhood email alert. Subject line from Linda Mercer. She was already sending out her victory lap. Linda wrote the email like she was planting a flag. Subject line, Community Safety Improvement near Creek Boundary. She sent it to the full neighborhood list just after noon, right when people were checking phones between lunch breaks and errands, which told me she wanted maximum visibility and minimum scrutiny. I read it twice in the same quiet kitchen where I had just finished building a folder full of county maps, and with every sentence I could feel her confidence getting heavier. She thanked the board for supporting prompt action on what she called a non-compliant private crossing. She praised the association for protecting property values. She described the removal as a necessary response to repeated concerns about liability exposure and unauthorized land use. Then, in the fourth paragraph, she made the kind of mistake people make when they start believing their own authority is a substitute for facts. She wrote that the work had been completed under direct board supervision and with approved contractor coordination on association-governed land adjacent to Lot 14, which was mine. Direct board supervision. Approved contractor coordination. Association-governed land. 3 clean phrases, typed in black and white, all carrying more confidence than proof. I sat there with the email open on my laptop and the printed easement map beside it, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rush of creek water through the open gap behind the house. It is a strange thing, watching someone build the case against themselves in complete sentences. Most people think justice arrives as a surprise. In my experience, it usually arrives after somebody writes down the wrong thing and sends it to too many witnesses. I saved the email as a PDF, then took screenshots of the header, recipient list, and timestamp. After that, I opened the county engineering directory and started looking for the right office. Not code enforcement, not tax assessment, stormwater and public works. The people who understand corridors, access routes, and who gets very interested when heavy equipment shows up where it should not. I found a general contact first, then a name I recognized from years back. Not the same engineer from the flood season, but someone in the same division, and I drafted a message that said only what I could support. I did not rant. I did not speculate. I attached the parcel overlay, the archived survey, the still image of the county plate under the footing, and a short clip from my security camera showing Linda on site while the contractor removed the structure. Then I added the HOA notice assessing me for demolition costs, and the neighborhood email describing the work as board's supervised action on association land. Facts breathe better when you do not crowd them. Before I hit send, I walked back out onto the porch. The afternoon sun had burned off the last of the morning damp, and the backyard looked wider now in a way I hated. Without the bridge, the 2 banks seemed to stare at each other like strangers. A pair of squirrels picked along the sycamore roots on the far side, stopping where the planks used to begin. The cut posts stood there like unfinished sentences. I rested both hands on the porch rail and thought about my father, about the years I had kept that crossing sound because it mattered to me more than titles ever did, and about how Linda had mistaken care for weakness. That was the pattern with her. She saw maintenance and assumed ownership. She saw privacy and assumed isolation. She saw a man who did not attend every HOA meeting and assumed he would fold the second she mailed him a notice on nice paper. My phone buzzed in my pocket while I was still looking at the creek. Another email. This one from Linda directly. The message was shorter than the neighborhood blast and sharper around the edges. She wanted written confirmation that I would not attempt to reconstruct the crossing or interfere with future association improvements near the drainage area. Improvements. That word almost made me laugh. She had removed a county access structure, cut up a protected bank, and now she was talking about improvements. I went back inside, attached her second email to the same folder, and finally sent my packet to County Public Works. A few minutes later, an automatic reply landed in my inbox, plain and emotionless, confirming receipt and assigning a reference number. I looked at that number for a long second. By noon, Linda Mercer thought the matter was finished. By 12:14, it belonged to a department with trucks, survey rods, and no sense of humor about unauthorized work near public drainage. The rest of that afternoon moved with the kind of quiet that feels temporary, like a room after somebody has slammed a door and left the walls humming. I did not hear back from County Public Works right away, and I did not expect to. Offices like that do not run on outrage. They run on intake, routing, review, and whether the paper in front of them suggests a nuisance complaint or a problem with coordinates attached. What mattered was that my packet had landed with a reference number, and reference numbers have a way of turning private arrogance into public procedure. Around 3 o'clock, I walked the bank myself. The ground was already drying where the loader had torn through the approach, leaving compressed track marks and shallow shearing along the edge of the grass. Up close, the damage looked even sloppier than it had from the porch. The contractors had not just removed the span. They had disturbed the approach on both sides, dragged older hardware into a loose pile, and left the far footing exposed enough for the county tag to show clear as day under the streaks of mud. I crouched near it and brushed away a little more silt with my fingers. The stamp number came into view, plain block characters pressed into metal years before Linda Mercer ever bought a house in the neighborhood. It felt almost absurd how small the thing was compared to the size of the mistake hanging from it. I took close photographs from 3 angles, then wider shots showing the bank, the open crossing, and the visible track pattern leading down toward the creek corridor. By then 2 neighbors had wandered close enough to pretend they were only out for air. One was Gary from the cul-de-sac, the kind of man who always acted like every conflict was a cable channel he had not paid for but still wanted access to. The other was Denise Holloway, who served on the social committee and carried neighborhood information around the way some people carry pollen. Gary looked at the missing bridge, then at me. "Heard the board finally dealt with this," he said. Not rude, just curious in that polished suburban way that lets people fish without getting wet. I kept my phone in my hand and looked back at the creek. "They dealt with something," I said. Denise shifted her weight and lowered her sunglasses. "Linda said it was unauthorized and dangerous." I nodded once. Linda says a lot of things before she checks a map. That landed. I could see it in the way Denise's chin moved back a fraction, not enough to look dramatic, just enough to show the sentence had found purchase. People in neighborhoods like ours are not brave, but they are highly sensitive to changing weather. And the social weather had started to turn. By early evening, I had 3 more emails in my inbox. None from county. 2 from neighbors asking if the crossing would be rebuilt, written in that careful tone people use when they suspect a story has layers. And 1 from Linda, this time copied to the full board, warning me not to tamper with the site or remove any materials pending association review. Pending association review. She was still writing like the land answered to her. I read that message standing at my counter while dinner warmed in the oven and shadows lengthened over the backyard. Then I noticed something that made me set the plate back down without touching it. At the bottom of the email thread, below her warning and above the boilerplate signature block, Linda had attached a scanned work order from the grading company. Her name was on it. So was the board approval note. So was the line item for bridge removal and bank access. She had not just supervised the mistake. She had documented the invoice path. I saved that too. Outside, the creek kept sliding under open air where the span used to be, making the same steady sound it had made all day, patient and indifferent. I remember standing there with the kitchen light behind me, and the laptop glow on my hands, thinking that Linda Mercer still believed this was a neighborhood dispute. She had no idea she had already started handing me the parts of a much bigger file. The next morning arrived clear and cold, the kind of southern spring morning that looks gentle until you step outside and feel the bite still left in the air. I was on the back porch before sunrise again, not because I expected more equipment, but because the creek had become impossible not to monitor. Once something quiet gets disturbed, you start listening for it differently. The water moved through the opening where the span had been, sliding past the cut posts and exposed footing with a sound that was thinner now, less muffled, as if the missing boards had changed the acoustics of the whole channel. I had a legal pad on the porch rail, my phone in one hand, and the county reference number written at the top of the first page when my inbox finally chimed at 7:18. The email came from a project coordinator in County Public Works. Short message. Professional tone. They had reviewed the initial materials, forwarded the matter to stormwater infrastructure and field compliance, and wanted additional photographs of the exposed tag, current bank conditions, and any documentation showing who had ordered the removal. I read it twice, then once more, not because it was complicated, but because of what it meant. The packet had not been dismissed, and more important than that, the right kind of people were now asking the right kind of questions. I sent the additional photographs within 10 minutes, including the work order Linda had accidentally attached to her board email, the HOA assessment letter, and a still frame from my camera showing her standing on the bank while the contractor worked. Then I grabbed my jacket and headed back down to the creek for a cleaner set of site images in morning light. The grass along the bank was wet enough to darken my boots, and the air smelled like damp leaves and churned clay. Up close, the disturbed approach looked worse than it had the day before. The machine tracks had compressed the edge of the corridor into shallow ruts, and one side of the runoff channel showed a fresh crumble where the ground had been forced too close to the drop. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to matter to somebody whose job description included erosion control and access protection. I took wide shots, then close ones, careful to frame the visible county plate, the footing, the track marks, and the debris pile the contractor had left near the far side. While I was photographing the bank, I heard footsteps behind me on the grass. Denise Holloway again, this time with a fleece jacket zipped to her chin and a stainless travel mug in one hand. She slowed when she saw me kneeling by the footing. "You are documenting all of this?" she asked. Her tone was different now, less curious, more cautious. I stood up and slipped the phone into my jacket pocket. "County asked for photos." That stopped her. You could almost hear the words settle into place between us. County changes the temperature of a conversation. It takes a neighborhood disagreement and gives it a vehicle number, a department stamp, and somebody on salary who does not care about clubhouse politics. Denise looked past me toward the exposed tag. Linda said this was association property. I looked at the footing, then back at her. Linda said that before anybody checked. Denise took a sip from her mug and nodded slowly, like she was already deciding how to repeat that line later without sounding like she had chosen a side. By 9 o'clock, the neighborhood message board lit up with a new post from Linda reminding residents not to speculate about board actions and to direct questions only through official channels. That was the first crack. People only warn others not to speculate when they feel control slipping. And the second crack came an hour later, when County Public Works sent a second email requesting site access for a field review and asking whether the contractor was still scheduled to perform any additional work near the creek. I stood in my kitchen reading that question with the morning sun hitting the counter and thought, very calmly, that Linda Mercer had just gone from talking big in email threads to becoming a location on somebody's inspection route. The field review was set for Thursday at 10 in the morning. And from the moment I got the email, I could feel the whole thing shifting out of neighborhood time and into county time. Neighborhood time is gossip, meetings, side conversations at mailboxes, people pretending not to stare while collecting trash cans from the curb. County time is slower on the front end and heavier when it finally arrives. It measures things. It documents. It asks for names and dates, and whether anyone thought to verify a boundary before moving equipment across it. I replied to the coordinator within 5 minutes and confirmed site access. Then I did the one thing Linda never expected from me. I stayed quiet. I did not post in the neighborhood thread. I did not forward the county emails to anyone on the board. I did not even answer the 2 messages I got that afternoon from neighbors suddenly trying to sound friendly while asking whether the crossing had always been there. Silence has weight when other people are already nervous. By Wednesday evening, that weight was showing. Linda sent out another update. This one longer, more polished, and somehow more brittle. She described the situation as an administrative misunderstanding and assured residents that the board was handling all communications with outside agencies. outside agencies. She could not even bring herself to say county. The language had changed from triumph to management, which told me she had started to understand that something real was moving toward her, even if she still believed wording could contain it. Later that night, I stood at the kitchen counter with the back door cracked open, listening to crickets start up beyond the yard and the creek moving under empty air. The house smelled like black coffee and printer ink because I had spent the last hour organizing everything into a clean folder on the table. Printed maps in chronological order, property portal screenshots, archived survey, photographs of the exposed plate, the HOA assessment letter, Linda's neighborhood announcement, her direct email warning me not to interfere, the attached work order with her name and the board notation. It was not a stack anymore. It was a narrative. That matters. Facts on their own can sit in a pile for years. Facts arranged in sequence become momentum. Thursday morning came bright and cool, with a hard blue sky and that kind of sharp light that makes every edge look more honest. I was outside before 9, walking the approach again, making sure nothing had changed overnight. Dew clung to the grass. The disturbed soil near the bank had dried into shallow ridges where the loader tracks had compressed it. The county tag at the far footing still showed clear. I had just stepped back toward the porch when Linda appeared at the edge of my side yard, as if she had been rehearsing the entrance. Cream jacket again. Dark sunglasses this time. Clipboard in hand like always. I understand you have been contacting departments without coordinating through the association, she said. No greeting. No pretense. Just irritation wrapped in formal language. I kept one hand in my pocket and looked at her over the porch rail. I contacted the people responsible for the corridor your contractor entered. She took another step, careful of the grass, and lowered her voice. This does not need to become bigger than it is. I remember almost laughing at that, not because it was funny, but because it was so revealing. She still thought size was something she controlled. Like scale belonged to whoever spoke first and loudest. That depends, I said, on whether your definition of it matches the map. Her jaw tightened, just slightly. Then she glanced toward the creek, toward the opening where the bridge had been, and for the first time since this started I saw something new on her face. Not guilt, not humility, calculation. She was trying to figure out what I knew, how much I had documented, and whether she still had room to frame the story before somebody with a county badge stepped onto the bank. The board acted on reasonable information, she said. Then the board should be comfortable explaining that information when they arrive. I did not say who. I did not need to. A white county pickup turned onto the street less than 2 minutes later, moving slowly past the hedges toward my driveway, with a measuring rod visible through the rear window. Linda watched it roll closer, and the whole neighborhood seemed to hold its breath at once. That was the moment the story stopped belonging to her. The truck stopped halfway down my driveway with the kind of unhurried confidence that comes from not needing anybody's permission to be there. White county seal on the door. Utility rack on top. Mud already dried along the wheel wells from some earlier site visit that morning. 2 people stepped out, not rushed, not dramatic, just focused in the way experienced field staff always are when they have coordinates. A reference number, and enough paperwork to know they are not coming in blind. The first was a woman in a Navy County windbreaker carrying a tablet and a rolled site map under one arm. The second was a man in a tan work shirt with a survey rod and a hard case that looked like it had spent years in truck beds and ditches. Neither of them paid much attention to Linda at first, which was probably the most offensive thing that had happened to her all week. They looked at me, confirmed my name, thanked me for granting access, and then walked straight past the porch toward the creek as if the land had already told them where to go. Linda stayed where she was for half a second too long, then recovered and fell in beside them with that brisk, managerial stride she used when she wanted to appear central to something. I am Linda Mercer, she said, president of the Homeowners Association. We have been managing a safety issue in this area. The woman with the tablet gave a polite nod without breaking stride. We are here to verify corridor conditions and ownership classification related to a reported removal event, she said. Reported removal event. That was county language at its finest. No outrage. No opinion. Just a phrase clean enough to carry consequences. We reached the bank together, the morning light catching on the exposed footing and the water moving beneath the open span where the bridge had been. The man with the survey rod stepped down first and crouched near the far side, brushing back a little dirt with the side of his glove. He did not need long. There it is, he said. The woman came down beside him, glanced at the metal plate, then opened the map roll against her thigh and checked the markings on the tablet. I watched her eyes move once from the tag to the creek line to the shaded corridor on the screen. That was the exact moment the site stopped being a debate and became a confirmation. Linda must have felt it too, because she started talking faster. This structure had been represented as private. We had repeated concerns from residents. We acted under board authority to address liability exposure. The woman finally looked up at her. Not rude. Not impressed either. Did the association obtain county clearance before authorizing work inside this access corridor? Linda blinked behind the sunglasses. Just once. Our understanding was that this was common area adjacent to a restricted residential boundary. The man by the footing stood up and looked at the disturbed bank, then at the track marks still visible in the dried soil. This is marked county infrastructure access, he said. And somebody brought equipment down the corridor. You could feel the air change. Not loudly. Just enough. Like pressure dropping before a storm. A few neighbors had gathered at a distance by then, close enough to watch, far enough to pretend they were only outside by coincidence. Linda adjusted her grip on the clipboard. There may have been a misunderstanding about the exact line. The woman with the tablet tapped the screen once and turned it slightly, not enough for the crowd, just enough for Linda. The exact line is documented, she said. What we need now is the name of the contractor, the date the work was authorized, and the party who approved site entry. I did not say a word. I did not need to. Linda opened her mouth, closed it, then looked toward me like she was suddenly aware that silence can be a witness too. I reached into the folder I had brought from the kitchen and handed the county woman a clipped set of documents. Work order with the contractor name. HOA assessment letter. Neighborhood email claiming direct board supervision. My still image showing Linda on site during removal. The woman took them, scanned the first page, then the second, and nodded once in a way that was almost invisible unless you were looking for it. This helps, she said. Linda stared at the papers in the county woman's hand, and for the first time since I had heard that backup alarm in the fog, she looked like someone who understood she was no longer narrating the event. She was being entered into it.